There's an international formula for building a fast car, and it goes something like this. Take the biggest engine you can possibly find and cram it into the smallest, lightest car that can handle it. It's big engine plus small car equals fun, and it's universally been how we've gotten some of the craziest cars in automotive history. Now, during the golden age of Detroit muscle, there were no shortage of big engines out there. However, most of the cars in that era were also pretty big. Most of the big burly V8s went into midsize and full-size sedans, your American land yachts. But a select few performance nuts from around the globe decided at that point in time that they were going to take those big engines and stuff them into the smallest cars possible, making the ultimate 60s and 70s hot rods. And they took the fast car formula to its logical extreme. So today we're counting down 8 of the craziest small cars with the biggest engines in automotive history. And at number 8, we have the Sunbeam Tiger. In 1964, the Roots Group had a hit on their hands with the Sunbeam Alpine, a gorgeous little British roadster. It had all the looks and it had the light weight. What it did not have though was power. Under the hood sat an inline-4 with less than 2 liters of displacement. And if the Roots Group wanted the Alpine to compete on the world stage, that just wasn't going to cut it. So they called the one man who had already proven that he knew how to fix this exact problem, Carroll Shelby. And Shelby did what Shelby does, and dropped in a small block Ford V8. The result was the Tiger. And from 1964 through 1967, Roots built 2 generations of it. The Mark I, which carried the 260, and the Mark II, which carried the 289. That bigger engine pushed the 2,600-pound Tiger to 0 to 60 in a claimed 7.5 seconds and well on its way to a 120 mile/hour top speed. But those numbers weren't really accurate. A 2,600-pound car with a well-sorted 289 in it was a riot, and in reality, with better rubber, would have been much faster. You have to consider how small the Sunbeam Tiger was. This was a car that ran on an 86-inch wheelbase. And it was just 60.5 inches wide, which meant if I laid down, I would be taller in terms of height than the car was wide by almost a foot. It sounds pretty small when you put it in perspective like that. Now, Roots built 7,000 Tigers over the 4-year period, and the car earned its stripes on the track too. It made a solid attempt at the 1964 24 Hours of Le Mans, and a race-tuned Tiger driven by Peter Bolton and Jim Laffa finished first in the small GT class at the 1965 Daytona Continental. The Tiger even found fame on the big screen, showing up in film and TV, including Get Smart. And then in 1967, though, the Roots Group collapsed and it was bought up by Chrysler. And that was the end of the Tiger, which was a shame because by the standards of this list, those 2 Ford V8s that were shoved in the Tiger were still on the small side. And for all intents and purposes, when the Tiger died, it was just getting started. Now, number 7 is a fun one. We're going to go to the Studebaker Super Lark. In the early 60s, Studebaker was doing a lot of cool stuff in the automotive industry that was a bit outside the box, especially if you remember the Avanti, which was trading fiberglass punches with the Corvette at the same time. Studebaker at this point, though, was never a super cash-heavy company. They were always kind of scrambling and fighting their way to the top of the food chain to try and take something unique to market. And so for their next performance hurrah, what they did was take their small and relatively unassuming Studebaker Lark economy car and shove as much Studebaker V8 into it as they could. And they added a supercharger. Forced induction was still fairly new territory for production cars in the early 60s. The engine in this new Studebaker Lark R2 wasn't a giant displacement motor at just 289 cubic inches. But with the Paxton supercharger that they bolted onto it, it made a very respectable 300 horsepower and 303 foot-pounds of torque. At just 3,350 pounds with a 109-inch wheelbase, the Lark may technically be one of the biggest cars on the list. But keep in mind, this car arrived to market before pony cars as a genre even existed. This was a sub 14-second quarter-mile car, and it was very rare considering just 325 Larks got the R2 supercharged motor, and only 53 of those cars received the full Super Lark package. And Studebaker wasn't done yet though, because the follow-up R3 package got a 305 cubic inch motor, making up to 335 horsepower and 320 foot-pounds of torque in supercharged form. And that car was lighter, at just over 3,000 pounds. But those are even rarer than the already rare R2 cars, with just about 125 R3s being built. This last performance hoorah from Studebaker in the early 60s that gave us the Avanti and the Lark was awesome, but it wasn't enough to save the company. Studebaker closed its South Bend factory at the end of 1963. The Canadian plant hung on a couple more years, but after 1966 the company was essentially finished. But for that one moment when Studebaker shoved a blown V8 into their smallest car, they were making some stuff that was pretty rad. Now number 6 on the list is going to have to be the Basil Green Capri. Now if you don't know who Basil Green was, he was essentially the South African Carroll Shelby. I've made a few videos on him in the past and one on this car specifically. See, Green was already building the Capri Piranha V6, which was a rare, hottened up version of Ford's Capri Coupe. But in 1970, he decided that the V6 in it wasn't enough. So he shoved a Ford Windsor V8 small block under the hood instead. And this wasn't just any Windsor small block. This would have been a Hypo 289 motor, the same that you would have found inside of your K-Code Mustang GTs. And here's where it gets crazy. Basil Green replaced the iron intake manifold and bell housing on these cars with aluminum parts. And through careful weight management, he kept these V8 powered ones at almost the same weight as a standard Capri 3000, despite having an engine with 2 extra liters of displacement and far more performance. The finished cars only weighed about 2,500 pounds, which made them considerably lighter than their Mustang counterparts. The numbers showed they would do a mid 14 in the quarter and do 0 to 60 in about 6 seconds. Now those numbers are a bit low for the actual performance of these cars. Booting it in a 289 Hypo car that weighs just 2,500 pounds, that's gonna feel like a pretty quick car, regardless if it's a stock 271 horse or if it's a more worked over Shelby style motor that was in the 300 horsepower range. Green built about 400 of these V8 Capris before the Ford South African plant stopped producing the Mark I Capri in 1972, which then cut off his supply chain of chassis and parts. And now for number 5, this car also ended up hailing from South Africa using almost the exact same formula as the Basil Green Capris, except this time this car was a GM product, the Can-Am Firenza. And this one came straight from GM in 1973. And at the time, GM's American branch wanted nothing to do with racing. But somehow, half a world away, a man by the name of Basil van Rooyen, not to be confused with Basil Green from Basil Green Motors, and Jeff Mortimer talked GM South Africa into funding a project to go win races. And their starting point was the tiny Vauxhall Firenza. And their engine of choice for this Vauxhall, you might ask? It was none other than the legendary DZ302 small block V8 that would have been found in the Z28 Camaros here in the States. Van Rooyen and Mortimer built exactly 100 of these Z28 powered Vauxhalls to satisfy homologation rules. The locals nicknamed it the Little Chev, and it was absurdly fast. Technically on paper, even faster than the Basil Green Capri that we just talked about. These were 290 plus horsepower cars that weighed less than 2,500 pounds. 0 to 60 was a claimed 5.4 seconds, likely tire limited, and the top speed was over 140 miles per hour. And supposedly one of these cars in period even beat a Lamborghini Espada in a drag race, which to me is not surprising at all. Then though, the oil crisis hit, and continuing the Can-Am Firenza became impossible for GM South Africa. After 1 year and just 100 cars, that was it. And it's rumored that only 30 or 40 of these cars that are real still survive to this day. Now, number 4 is going to be one of my favorites, and that is the Randall AMC Gremlin 401 XR. Now, going back stateside, AMC's Gremlin, which was essentially their economy car sedan slash coupe with the trunk area lopped off of it from a styling perspective, was selling very well, as was their up-trim model of it, the Gremlin X. And at the same time, there was Randall AMC, which was essentially the Yanko version of an AMC dealership down in Arizona. In 1972, Randall AMC started taking regular 304 cubic inch V8 Gremlin X's, which already had a pretty big engine in them, and swapped in a 401 cubic inch motor that put out 255 net horsepower. The result came to be known as the Gremlin 401 XR, with the R standing for Randall. It rode on a short little 96-inch wheelbase, measured just 70 inches or so wide, and weighed about 26 to 2,700 pounds. Now, full disclosure, the exact reason this car isn't the highest on the list is that this swap wasn't as crazy of an engineering feat as it sounds. See, AMC motors are all roughly the same size. If you could fit a 304 in something, you could fit a 401 into it too. They didn't have a small block architecture and a big block architecture at this time like Chevrolet might have had. The 401 in theory would just drop right in. They would just have to source it from a parts catalog or a different vehicle and stuff it into the Gremlin. And while the install was fairly straightforward, the performance it yielded was no joke. The 401 XRs could dash a quarter mile in the mid-13s, which was pretty darn fast for the time. Between 72 and 74, Randall built about 20 of these strange little muscle machines, and they stand as actually some of the fastest cars to ever roll off an AMC showroom floor before AMC was no more in 1987. And number 3 is going to be one of the Mopar family. This one is the M-Code Dart. This one actually also starts its life in a dealer too. In 1968, Norm Kraus of Grand Spalding Dodge stuffed a 440 cubic inch Magnum into 48 compact Dodge Darts and called it the Grand Spalding Special, GSS. Chrysler watched this, took notes, and then the next year decided to take the initiative and do it themselves as a special order car. That's more or less how the 69 M-Code Dodge Dart was born. Chrysler built about 640 of them, and this motor in the Dart was a recipe for pure violence. The top trim 440 made around 375 horsepower with an earth-moving 480 foot-pounds of torque in a car that weighed about 3,400 pounds. And to be honest, felt kind of tinny being the economy car that was the Dart. But the coolest part about these was that there wasn't much to visually separate an M-Code Dart from any other Dart, which made it one of the best factory sleepers around. But pushing them hard enough, these cars would be 12-second cars. And with real performance came real compromises. These ones all had manual brakes, and air conditioning was not available. And there simply just wasn't room left under the hood for accessories with that giant big block shoved under there. These were dedicated street sleepers, and they were some of the best available from the factory that year. And now we're getting down to the wire of what I believe to be the two ultimate big engine, small car formula vehicles. And number 2 is one that you probably have been waiting for on this list, and that is going to be the 427 Shelby Cobra. Now, to be fair, quite a few Shelby cars could make a claim to be put on this list, and you would be right. But this is the one that I chose because it's the purest expression of the whole idea. It's a 427 cubic inch motor, which is 7 liters, in a tiny little roadster that weighed just over 2,500 pounds. That race-tuned 427 put out well over 400 horsepower and near 500 foot-pounds of torque. To this day, a 427 Cobra is a wicked fast car, and it provides one of the most insane driving experiences out there. Granted, I haven't driven one yet, but so I've heard. The car itself was tiny too. It only had a 90-inch wheelbase and it was 68 inches wide. But what set it apart from everything else on this list so far is that this was a car that wasn't only built for the straight line. The Cobra was designed to be an all-around sports car. It had good suspension and decent steering to it. Now granted, the 289 Cobras and the small block cousins did tend to handle better than the 427 because they had less weight over the front. Still though, in period, the 427 Cobras were no slouch in the turns. Now I could dive a lot more into the 427 Cobras, but I figured it'd be best to save a full deep dive on those cars for another video. And so we could get to the number 1 car on the list, which is the most viewed video on my channel ever, and it is probably one of the most insane cars I've ever done any research on. And that is going to be the Motion 454 Chevy Vega. This car is just bonkers. And let's be honest, when you think of performance car, the Chevy Vega doesn't really show up anywhere in your initial thoughts. It was, after all, a subcompact with a pretty garbage inline-4 that was fitted with it, and they had horrible rust issues. But then you enter with Joel Rosen of Motion Performance. When customers asked him to soup up a Vega, he typically installed a 350, and for most people that was plenty. But in 1972, a few determined buyers demanded more. They wanted a 454 big block under that tiny hood. Now, most builders believed the Vega was too weak of a platform to handle all that torque and extra weight up front from the 454, and this is reasonably sound logic for an individual with common sense. But those of us that like to go fast don't have that much common sense. So Joel Rosen figured, why not? Let's go ahead and put the 454 in it. Now, fitting a big block into a Vega required massive surgery to the frame and body. They had to hammer plenty of metal out of the way, they had to cut the firewall, and they had to use custom motor mounts. It was a whole thing. And compared to the 427 Cobra, the Vega might as well have been useless because this thing was even more front heavy, it didn't handle very well, and it was really only built for a straight line. The finished monster would weigh about 3,100 pounds, and that was even carrying an engine that was 400 pounds heavier than the normal Vega inline-4. But now it put out over 450 horsepower or more. With a 4-speed and a tall rear gear, this was a recipe to blow the tires right off. These Motion Vegas were 11-second quarter-mile cars, and with the right tire and some proper weight reduction, these were definitely 10-second cars, I have no doubt about it. But you'd probably have a hard time stopping it or ever turning with it. Motion only made a handful of V8 Vegas, and they also sold parts to convert your Vega to a V8, and of those, even fewer were big block cars. The kind of person that would put a 454 into a Vega back then, that was a small breed of people. I wish I had better data, but Rosen's record keeping in period really just left a lot to be desired, and after his passing, it just become a bit harder to find actual numbers on these cars. Especially considering that Vegas, basically all of them, rusted away, so you have to figure some that lived an even harder life than most might also have been doomed to the same fate, with the engine pulled out and put into something else, while the worthless carcass of the Vega was left to rot away in a junkyard. And that is my ultimate list of the smallest cars with the biggest V8 stuffed into them. I tried to keep it period, all 80s and earlier, so let me know in the comments down below what you thought, which was your favorite car on the list, and let me know if you want to see a part 2 to this, or if you thought I missed any cars that should have been on here. I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out a ton. Otherwise though, I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.